I was lying on a gurney at UC San Diego Medical Center, bleeding internally, when the doctor told me I needed emergency surgery to survive. With only 45 minutes before being taken into the operating room, I called my parents and begged them to watch my 3-year-old twins, Liam and Lucas, for just a few hours. What I received wasn't fear or concern. It was a text message. "You've always been a burden. We already have plans with your sister tonight. Figure it out yourself." In that moment, I made a decision that ended everything. And 2 weeks later, at my grandfather William Carter's birthday gathering in La Jolla, one sentence from him stopped the entire family cold. I was still staring at my phone when the gurney rolled through the automatic doors of UC San Diego Medical Center. The ceiling lights streaked past above me, bright and unforgiving, but the words on my screen stayed perfectly clear. "You've always been a burden. Figure it out yourself." My name is Emily Carter. I'm 33 years old, a cardiology resident in San Diego, and a single mother to 3-year-old twin boys, Liam and Lucas. I've spent years learning how to stay calm under pressure, how to make decisions when seconds matter. None of that training prepared me for reading that message while my body was failing. "Emily," a nurse said as she jogged alongside the gurney, "stay with us. Can you tell me where you are?" "The hospital," I said automatically. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The pain in my abdomen was sharp, insistent, but it wasn't what scared me most. What terrified me was the clock in my head. Liam and Lucas were at home with the babysitter. She was scheduled to leave at 8. It was already after 7. My parents lived less than 40 minutes away. They could have been there in time. They just didn't want to be. A familiar face appeared above me as we entered the trauma bay. Dr. Jason Lee, one of the ER physicians I'd worked with during rotations, met my eyes with professional focus. "Emily, you were hit hard on the driver's side," he said. "CT shows internal bleeding, likely splenic rupture. You need surgery now." I nodded. I understood exactly what that meant. What I didn't understand was how I'd managed to become so invisible to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. "They're not coming," I said quietly. Jason glanced at my phone, still clenched in my hand. He didn't ask who I meant. "Do you need me to call someone else?" "There isn't anyone," I said. Then I swallowed. "Actually, can I use your phone? Mine's about to die." He handed it to me without hesitation. I searched for an emergency nanny service, my fingers shaking as I tapped the screen. I called the first number that answered and explained the situation in clipped, clinical sentences. Yes, emergency surgery. Yes, twins. Yes, tonight. Yes, I'd pay whatever it took. When I hung up, the arrangements were already in motion. Someone would stay with my boys. Someone responsible. Someone who showed up. A stranger. Jason watched me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded, even though something inside me had cracked open. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked. "Can you screenshot that message? Just in case." He did it without comment. The doors to the operating room swung open moments later. As they wheeled me inside, I closed my eyes and let go of the phone. For a brief, surreal second, I pictured my parents getting ready to leave the house, my sister laughing as they talked about their plans. I wondered if any of them felt even a flicker of hesitation. Then the anesthesia took hold and everything went dark. I woke up hours later in recovery. The surgery had been successful. Ruptured spleen, significant blood loss. Another 20 minutes, they told me, and the outcome could have been very different. I drifted in and out of sleep, listening to machines hum and nurses speak in low, efficient tones. No one came. No missed calls, no worried messages, no parents at my bedside pretending they'd been frantic all along. On the third day, when the pain was manageable and the fog had begun to lift, I asked for my laptop. The nurse hesitated, then brought it anyway. I logged into my bank account. 8 years of automatic transfers stared back at me. Monthly, predictable, relentless. Mortgage payments, health insurance, emergency expenses. Thousands of dollars leaving my account without fail. I'd started helping my parents right after residency. It was supposed to be temporary, just until things stabilized. Just this once. Somewhere along the way, just this once became every month, and I never stopped it. I told myself it was family. I told myself I could handle it. I told myself being needed meant I mattered. From that hospital bed, I canceled every single transfer. Then I blocked 3 numbers: my mother, my father, and my sister. There was no dramatic release, no tears, just a quiet, bone-deep relief, like setting down something unbearably heavy that I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. Later that afternoon, Jason stopped by with a coffee. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I looked around the small recovery room, at the IV in my arm, at the sunlight filtering through the blinds. "For the first time in a long time," I said slowly, "I feel like I might actually survive more than just the surgery." At the time, I thought that decision was the end of the story. I didn't yet know it was only the beginning. Grandpa William's house in La Jolla sat high above the coastline, white walls glowing softly in the late afternoon sun. From the outside, it looked peaceful, dignified, untouched by conflict. Inside, it was filled with voices, music, and the familiar performance of a family that liked to believe it was flawless. Cars lined the curved driveway when we arrived. Liam and Lucas pressed their faces to the window, excited by the balloons tied to the railing and the sound of laughter drifting from the backyard. "Big party," Lucas said. "Yes," I replied quietly, "it is." Grandpa William helped the boys out of the car, taking each of their hands with practiced ease. He looked at me for a moment before we walked in, his expression steady, reassuring. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew why we were here. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation. Relatives I hadn't seen in years turned, smiling warmly, commenting on how well I looked, how lucky I was to have recovered so quickly. I accepted their words politely, keeping my posture calm, my breathing even. Then I saw them. My parents stood near the ocean-facing windows, glasses of champagne in hand. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like people who hadn't spent years leaning on someone else's silence. My mother laughed at something my aunt said. My father nodded along, confident and composed. They noticed me almost immediately. My mother's smile stiffened. My father's eyes narrowed, just slightly. Before either of them could move, Madison appeared at my side. My sister hadn't changed. Perfect posture, flawless hair, effortless confidence wrapped in an expensive dress. She leaned in and kissed my cheek lightly. "Emily," she said brightly, "you made it. We heard about the accident. Sounds scary, but you're fine now, right?" I met her gaze. "I lost a spleen. I almost died." Her smile faltered for half a second. "Oh," she said softly. "Mom said it wasn't that serious." "Mom wasn't there," I thought. "None of you were." Madison recovered quickly, patting my arm. "Well, you look great. That's what matters." She turned away, already rejoining another conversation. I focused on Liam and Lucas, grounding myself in their presence. They didn't notice the tension. They were too busy exploring, tugging Grandpa's hand toward the backyard. For the first part of the party, I stayed quiet. I let people greet me, tell me how strong I was, how impressive it was that I handled everything on my own. I smiled, nodded, played my role. Strength had always been the part assigned to me. Then I heard my sister's voice again. "I'm honestly worried about Emily," Madison said, her tone carefully concerned. She stood near a group of cousins and aunts, her voice just loud enough to carry. "Since the accident, she's been different. She cut Mom and Dad off completely." My mother dabbed at her eyes beside her. "We don't know what we did wrong. We've only ever tried to support her." A familiar pressure built in my chest. "She's always been sensitive," Madison continued gently. "Being a single mom is a lot. I think the stress finally caught up with her." Soft murmurs followed. Pity, concern, doubt. I didn't turn around. I poured juice for Liam, helped Lucas with a cookie, my hand steady even as my pulse quickened. Aunt Margaret appeared beside me, her voice low. "They've been calling people for days, setting you up." "I know," I said quietly. Across the patio, Grandpa William stood near the railing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Our eyes met. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. The music faded as someone tapped a glass. Grandpa stepped forward. Even at 70, he didn't need to raise his voice. The room instinctively stilled, conversations dissolving into silence. "Before we continue celebrating," he said evenly, "there are a few things I'd like to address." My father shifted. "Dad—" "Not yet, Robert," Grandpa said calmly. "I've listened. Now it's my turn." The air changed. Smiles faded. Bodies leaned in. "You've painted a picture today," Grandpa continued, his gaze steady on my parents, "of a daughter who's become confused and ungrateful. Before anyone accepts that version, I'd like to ask a simple question." My father straightened. "Of course. Who?" Grandpa asked. "Has been paying your mortgage for the past 8 years?" The color drained from my father's face. My mother's hand trembled around her glass. Grandpa reached into his jacket and removed a manila folder. My folder. "I have complete records," he said calmly, "of monthly transfers from Emily's account to your mortgage lender. 96 consecutive payments." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Madison went pale. My parents stood frozen. "This isn't an accusation," Grandpa said. "It's a fact, and facts deserve to be heard." I stood there holding my children as the silence deepened, knowing the story my family had told for years was finally unraveling. And this time, the truth wasn't going to be interrupted. Grandpa William's house in La Jolla sat high above the coastline, white walls glowing softly in the late afternoon sun. From the outside, it looked peaceful, dignified, untouched by conflict. Inside, it was filled with voices, music, and the familiar performance of a family that liked to believe it was flawless. Cars lined the curved driveway when we arrived. Liam and Lucas pressed their faces to the window, excited by the balloons tied to the railing and the sound of laughter drifting from the backyard. "Big party," Lucas said. "Yes," I replied quietly, "it is." Grandpa William helped the boys out of the car, taking each of their hands with practiced ease. He looked at me for a moment before we walked in, his expression steady, reassuring. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew why we were here. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation. Relatives I hadn't seen in years turned, smiling warmly, commenting on how well I looked, how lucky I was to have recovered so quickly. I accepted their words politely, keeping my posture calm, my breathing even. Then I saw them. My parents stood near the ocean-facing windows, glasses of champagne in hand. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like people who hadn't spent years leaning on someone else's silence. My mother laughed at something my aunt said. My father nodded along, confident and composed. They noticed me almost immediately. My mother's smile stiffened. My father's eyes narrowed, just slightly. Before either of them could move, Madison appeared at my side. My sister hadn't changed. Perfect posture, flawless hair, effortless confidence wrapped in an expensive dress. She leaned in and kissed my cheek lightly. "Emily," she said brightly, "you made it. We heard about the accident. Sounds scary, but you're fine now, right?" I met her gaze. "I lost a spleen. I almost died." Her smile faltered for half a second. "Oh," she said softly. "Mom said it wasn't that serious." "Mom wasn't there," I thought. "None of you were." Madison recovered quickly, patting my arm. "Well, you look great. That's what matters." She turned away, already rejoining another conversation. I focused on Liam and Lucas, grounding myself in their presence. They didn't notice the tension. They were too busy exploring, tugging Grandpa's hand toward the backyard. For the first part of the party, I stayed quiet. I let people greet me, tell me how strong I was, how impressive it was that I handled everything on my own. I smiled, nodded, played my role. Strength had always been the part assigned to me. Then I heard my sister's voice again. "I'm honestly worried about Emily," Madison said, her tone carefully concerned. She stood near a group of cousins and aunts, her voice just loud enough to carry. "Since the accident, she's been different. She cut Mom and Dad off completely." My mother dabbed at her eyes beside her. "We don't know what we did wrong. We've only ever tried to support her." A familiar pressure built in my chest. "She's always been sensitive," Madison continued gently. "Being a single mom is a lot. I think the stress finally caught up with her." Soft murmurs followed. Pity, concern, doubt. I didn't turn around. I poured juice for Liam, helped Lucas with a cookie, my hands steady even as my pulse quickened. Aunt Margaret appeared beside me, her voice low. "They've been calling people for days, setting you up." "I know," I said quietly. Across the patio, Grandpa William stood near the railing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Our eyes met. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. The music faded as someone tapped a glass. Grandpa stepped forward. Even at 70, he didn't need to raise his voice. The room instinctively stilled, conversations dissolving into silence. "Before we continue celebrating," he said evenly, "there are a few things I'd like to address." My father shifted. "Dad—" "Not yet, Robert," Grandpa said calmly. "I've listened. Now it's my turn." The air changed. Smiles faded. Bodies leaned in. "You've painted a picture today," Grandpa continued, his gaze steady on my parents, "of a daughter who's become confused and ungrateful. Before anyone accepts that version, I'd like to ask a simple question." My father straightened. "Of course. Who," Grandpa asked, "has been paying your mortgage for the past 8 years?" The color drained from my father's face. My mother's hand trembled around her glass. Grandpa reached into his jacket and removed a manila folder. "My folder. I have complete records," he said calmly, "of monthly transfers from Emily's account to your mortgage lender. 96 consecutive payments." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Madison went pale. My parents stood frozen. "This isn't an accusation," Grandpa said. "It's a fact, and facts deserve to be heard." I stood there holding my children as the silence deepened, knowing the story my family had told for years was finally unraveling. And this time, the truth wasn't going to be interrupted. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a verdict is read. Grandpa William opened the folder slowly, deliberately. Pages rustled in the ocean breeze drifting in from the patio doors, each sound impossibly loud in the stillness. "Let's be very clear," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a record." He looked around the room once, making sure everyone was paying attention. "Mortgage payments," he continued, $2,300 a month for 8 years. He paused. "That comes to over $220,000. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. My mother shook her head weakly. "William, please." "You've had years to explain," Grandpa said gently, cutting her off. "Today is about facts." He turned another page. "Health insurance premiums. When Robert lost coverage through work, Emily paid them. $800 a month. $76,000 total." Whispers broke out now, uncontrolled. "That can't be right," someone murmured. Grandpa didn't look up. "It's documented." He flipped another page. "Vehicle repairs, home maintenance, emergency expenses." He glanced at my parents. $44,000, give or take. Madison stepped forward abruptly. "Emily offered," she said sharply. "We never forced her." "No one said you did," Grandpa replied calmly, "but I'd like to ask you something." He met her eyes. "In 8 years, how many times did you thank her?" Madison opened her mouth. No words came out. "And how many times," Grandpa went on, "did you show up for her? When she was pregnant and alone? When she was studying for her boards with newborn twins? When she was rushed into emergency surgery?" My father stared at the floor. My mother's hands trembled. Grandpa closed the folder halfway. "Which brings us to the last point." My chest tightened. I already knew. 2 months ago," he said, "Emily was in a serious car accident. She was bleeding internally and needed immediate surgery. From the ambulance, she called her parents because her children were home with a babysitter who was about to leave." My mother's voice cracked. "We didn't know it was that serious." "Did you ask?" Grandpa asked quietly. Silence. "Did you call her back? Did you go to the hospital?" Nothing. Grandpa took out his phone. "This is the message she received in response. I'll read it exactly as written." I felt Liam's small hand tighten around my fingers. "You've always been a burden. We already have plans with your sister tonight. Figure it out yourself." The reaction was immediate. "Oh my God, that's horrible." "Out of context," Madison said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. "You don't understand." "There is no context," Aunt Margaret snapped from across the room, stepping forward. "Where that message is acceptable." My mother broke down completely then, sobbing openly. "I didn't mean it like that. I was overwhelmed." "You were dismissive," Grandpa corrected gently. "And dismissal in a crisis is a choice." He looked around the room again. "I'm not asking anyone to judge. I'm presenting facts. What you do with them is your decision." Then he turned to me. "Emily," he said softly, Do you want to say anything? I hadn't planned to. I'd told myself I would let the truth speak for itself. But my body moved before my fear could stop it. I handed Lucas to Aunt Margaret and stepped forward. I didn't come here to punish anyone, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my ears. I came because I spent most of my life believing love was something you earned by being useful. I looked at my parents. When you said Madison needed more support, I believed you. When you said I was strong enough to handle things on my own, I believed that too. A tear slipped down my cheek. But lying in an ambulance, bleeding and terrified, I finally understood something. I took a breath. I wasn't strong to you. I was convenient. My father tried to speak. Emily, I'm not finished, I said quietly. I don't hate you, I continued, but I won't keep paying for affection that should have been free. I won't teach my children that love comes with invoices. The room had shifted. People who had stood close to my parents had stepped back. A cousin met my eyes and nodded slowly. So what now? My father asked, his voice hollow. You've embarrassed us. Are you satisfied? I shook my head. No, but I'm not sorry either. This isn't about embarrassment. It's about honesty. I picked Lucas back up, holding both boys close. I'm not sending money anymore, and I need space, real space. My mother reached for me. I stepped back. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was clarifying. And as my parents turned and left early, faces pale and shoulders hunched, I realized something that felt almost unreal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of the room anymore. I had finally put it down. They left without saying goodbye. My parents moved quickly, my father guiding my mother toward the front door as she cried openly, no longer trying to save face. Madison followed a few steps behind them, her head down, her perfect composure finally fractured. No one stopped them. No one called their names. The door closed softly. For a moment, the house was silent. Then the room exhaled. Aunt Margaret crossed the space first and wrapped me in a careful hug, mindful of my still healing body. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I truly didn't know. Others followed, one by one. Cousins, aunts, even an uncle I'd barely spoken to over the years. Apologies came in quiet fragments. We believed them. We thought you were fine. You always seemed so capable. I know, I said gently, and I meant it. Grandpa William returned to his seat, the folder closed and set beside him. Liam and Lucas climbed onto his lap without hesitation, chattering about the cookies they'd been promised earlier. He smiled at them, steady and unshaken, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. The party didn't end, but it transformed. The conversations that resumed were different now, less polished, more honest. The performance had cracked, and something real was seeping through the edges. I stayed for another hour, then quietly gathered the boys. As we walked to the car, Grandpa squeezed my hand. Whatever happens next, he said, remember this. Truth doesn't ruin families. It reveals them. The drive back to San Diego was quiet. Liam and Lucas fell asleep in the back seat, their faces soft and peaceful. I watched the road stretch ahead of us and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Relief. The aftermath didn't come in one dramatic wave. It arrived in pieces. The family group chat went silent. 2 days later, it disappeared entirely. Then the messages began. Cousins texting late at night, aunts calling hesitantly, unsure what to say. I owe you an apology. I had no idea you were carrying all of that. I believed the story we were told. I answered when I could. When I couldn't, I let the messages wait. For the first time, I wasn't responsible for smoothing things over. 3 weeks later, Aunt Margaret called. They're selling the house, she said. I sat down slowly. What? They can't afford the mortgage without you. It went on the market yesterday. I waited for the rush of emotion I thought should come. Vindication, guilt, satisfaction, none of it arrived. Where are they going? I asked. Your Uncle Paul is letting them stay in his guest house for now, she said. But he made it clear it's temporary. They'll need jobs, real ones. I pictured my parents, so accustomed to comfort they never acknowledged the cost, suddenly forced to confront the reality of their dependence. That's not cruelty, Aunt Margaret added softly. That's consequence. That night, after the boys were asleep, I opened my budget spreadsheet. The familiar line items were gone. No mortgage payments, no insurance premiums, no emergency transfers. $3,000 sat unassigned. I created a new category, college fund. I split it evenly between Liam and Lucas and set the transfer. Watching the confirmation appear on the screen felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. 6 months passed. Life settled into a quieter rhythm. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to the hospital. Nothing extravagant. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a short drive to a good school. It felt like home in a way my old place never had. Grandpa became a constant. Sunday lunches, zoo trips, ice cream dates I pretended not to notice. He never pushed me to talk about my parents. He never needed to. One evening, nearly a year after the accident, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered this time. Emily, Madison's voice said, smaller than I remembered. I just wanted to tell you, I started therapy. I leaned against the counter. Okay. I didn't realize how much I needed being the favorite, she continued quietly. I thought it meant I was special. I didn't see what it cost you. I let the silence stretch. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she added. I just didn't want to pretend anymore. That's a start, I said. When we hung up, I didn't feel healed, but I felt lighter. That night, as I tucked Liam and Lucas into bed, I realized something that surprised me. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had stopped paying for a lie. And in the space that created, I was finally building something real. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, almost forgettable moments. The first was realizing I no longer checked my phone with a knot in my stomach. No late-night calls asking for help. No messages framed as concern but heavy with expectation. Just silence, clean and uninterrupted. The second was noticing how different my mornings felt. Liam and Lucas woke me before my alarm most days, climbing into my bed with warm hands and tangled limbs. We rushed through breakfast, negotiated shoes and backpacks, laughed over spilled juice. Ordinary chaos. Honest chaos. No one else's emergencies waited in the background. At the hospital, my attending pulled me aside one afternoon after rounds. You're different lately, she said. I braced automatically, old instincts kicking in. Different how? More decisive, she replied. You trust your judgment. You don't apologize before speaking. I smiled faintly. I'm working on that. What I didn't say was how much of that change came from no longer being drained before I even arrived at work. I wasn't carrying invisible weight anymore. I wasn't negotiating my worth internally every time I opened my mouth. One evening, after putting the boys to bed, I sat alone on the couch and let myself think about the past without spiraling, about the way I'd been praised for being easy, about how I'd confused silence with maturity, about how often I'd been told I didn't need anything. I understood it now. They hadn't meant I was strong, they meant I was convenient. My phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. A message from Grandpa William. Dinner this Sunday? Boys included. I smiled and typed back yes. Sunday dinners became a ritual. Not obligatory, not performative, just consistent. Grandpa listened to the boys with the kind of focus that made them feel like the center of the universe. He never rushed them. Never corrected them unnecessarily. He showed up exactly as he was. One night, as we washed dishes together, he spoke quietly. Your father called me. My shoulders tensed. What did he want? To ask if I'd talk to you, Grandpa said simply. And? I said no. I looked at him surprised. Just like that? Just like that, he confirmed. I told him that relationships don't resume because someone is uncomfortable with consequences. I let out a slow breath. Thank you. He nodded. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they raised you. That sentence stayed with me. A month later, my mother left another voicemail, shorter this time, less defensive. She said she missed the boys. She said she didn't recognize how everything had gotten so out of control. She asked if we could talk. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. I was learning something important. Not every moment required an answer. Some things needed time, not reaction. At work, I was offered a fellowship track I'd never thought I could manage before. The hours would be long, the responsibility heavier. Old me would have immediately listed the reasons I couldn't do it. Single mom, Too much pressure, not enough support. I surprised myself by saying yes. That night, we celebrated with pizza on the floor. Liam declared it the best dinner ever. Lucas fell asleep halfway through the movie, his head heavy against my arm. "This is my favorite day," Liam said matter-of-factly. It shouldn't have mattered as much as it did, but it did. Later, when the apartment was quiet again, I stood at the window and watched the city lights flicker on. A year ago, my life had revolved around keeping everyone else steady, even if it meant I was constantly off balance. Now, the center of my life was clear. My children, my work, my peace. I wasn't healed in the way stories like to pretend people are. There were still moments of sadness, of anger, of wondering how things might have been different. But there was no longer guilt, and that, I realized, was the real freedom. I hadn't chosen distance out of spite. I had chosen it out of self-respect. And for the first time, that choice felt sustainable. Not dramatic, not loud, just right. The test came when I least expected it. It was a Thursday night. Warm and quiet, the kind of San Diego evening where the ocean breeze slipped through open windows. Liam and Lucas were already asleep, their small bodies sprawled in opposite directions like they'd fought gravity and lost. I was sitting at the dining table reviewing notes for an upcoming case when my phone lit up. Unknown number. I ignored it. A minute later, it rang again. Then a text appeared. "Emily, it's Dad. Please answer." For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. What I felt wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. I set my notes aside and answered. "Emily," my father said immediately, his voice tight. "Thank you for picking up." "What do you need?" I asked, calm and even. There was a pause, filled with background noise I couldn't place. A television, a door closing. "Your mother isn't doing well," he said. "She's been sick. Stress-related. She keeps asking about you, about the boys." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry she's unwell," I said carefully. "But why are you calling me?" Another pause, longer this time. "We're struggling," he admitted. "More than we expected. The rent, the bills. It's been hard." There it was. The familiar turn. Concern becoming leverage. 8 years ago, I would have jumped in before he even finished the sentence. I would have asked how much, how fast, what I could rearrange. I would have told myself it was temporary, that it didn't mean anything. Now I breathed. "What are you asking for?" I said. "Help," he replied. "Just for a little while, until we get back on our feet." "No," I said. The word came out quietly, without heat. "No?" he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. "No," I said again. "I'm not sending money." Silence flooded the line. "Emily," he said finally, his tone sharpening, "we're your parents." "I know," I replied. "That's why this conversation matters." His voice rose. "After everything we did for you?" I almost smiled. "You mean after everything I did for you?" I said gently. "For 8 years." "That's not how family works," he snapped. "It is now," I answered. He exhaled sharply. "So you're just abandoning us?" I looked out the window, the city lights steady and distant. "I didn't abandon you," I said. "I stopped rescuing you." The word hung between us, undeniable. "You embarrassed us," he said bitterly. "You turned the whole family against us." "I told the truth," I replied. "What they did with it wasn't my choice." Another stretch of silence followed, thinner than the last. "So that's it," he said quietly. "You won't help." "No," I said. "But I hope you figure things out. I really do. Your mother will be devastated," he said, trying one last time. "Then protect her," I replied. "That's your responsibility, not mine." I ended the call. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. I walked down the hallway and peeked into the boys' room. Liam was curled around his stuffed shark. Lucas sprawled sideways across the bed. They were safe. They were cared for. They were not responsible for anyone else's survival. I sat on the floor between their beds for a moment, letting the quiet settle. That night, I didn't cry. What I felt instead was something solid clicking into place. Boundaries weren't something you set once and forgot. They were something you defended, calmly and repeatedly, especially when tested by the people who benefited most from you having none. The next morning, I woke up lighter. At work, I handled a difficult case without second-guessing myself. I spoke clearly during rounds. I trusted my instincts. Confidence, I realized, didn't come from approval. It came from consistency. That evening, I told Grandpa William about the call. He listened without interrupting, then nodded. "That was the moment," he said. "The moment for what?" I asked. "For you," he replied, "to prove you weren't who they trained you to be anymore." I smiled faintly. "I think I passed." "You did," he said, "and you didn't lose your compassion in the process. That's the hard part." As the weeks went on, the calls stopped. The messages faded. Life continued, ordinary and precious. Some nights, after the boys were asleep, I thought about how close I'd come to repeating the same cycle one more time, how easy it would have been to justify it. But I didn't. And that choice, quiet, firm, and unremarkable, changed everything. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I was the parent, the doctor, the person responsible for the life in front of me, not the one behind me. And for the first time, that role felt exactly right. The longer the silence lasted, the more I understood how loud my old life had been. It wasn't just the requests for money or the late-night calls framed as emergencies. It was the constant awareness of other people's moods, needs, expectations. The way I'd learned to anticipate disappointment before it was spoken. The way my body had stayed braced, even at rest. That tension was gone now. Not erased, released. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I came across an old envelope tucked into the back of a drawer. Inside were printed bank statements from years ago, the early days of my residency. I sat on the floor and flipped through them slowly. The numbers were smaller back then, but the pattern was already there. Regular transfers, notes in the margins I'd written to myself. Temporary until they stabilize. Family comes first. I closed the envelope and slid it back into the drawer, then pushed the drawer shut. I didn't need reminders anymore. A few weeks later, Evan brought home a drawing from school. Stick figures, crayon scribbles, a big blue shape I recognized as the ocean. "What's this?" I asked. "That's us," he said proudly, pointing. "You, me, Lucas." "Where's everyone else?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "That's everyone." I swallowed and hugged him tight. That night, after the boys were asleep, I thought about the family I'd once tried so desperately to hold together, how I'd mistaken proximity for connection, obligation for love, silence for peace. What I had now was smaller and infinitely stronger. Vanessa sent another message that month, just a short update. Therapy was helping. Work was inconsistent but improving. She didn't ask anything of me. She didn't hint. She didn't push. I replied with a single line. "I hope you keep going." For the first time, the relationship felt honest because it wasn't leaning on me. At the hospital, a new intern shadowed me during a long shift. Halfway through, she asked quietly, "How do you manage all of this and still have a life?" I almost answered with the old version of myself, the one who glorified exhaustion, who equated suffering with worth. Instead, I said, "I stopped believing I had to earn rest." She looked at me like that idea was radical. Maybe it was. On a rare free Saturday, Grandpa took the boys to the beach while I caught up on sleep. When they came back, sunburned and sandy, Lucas announced they'd built the biggest castle ever. "Grandpa helped," he said seriously. "He didn't leave." The words hit harder than they should have. Later, as Grandpa and I stood rinsing sand off shoes by the door, he spoke quietly. "You know, they might come back someday, changed, or pretending to be." "I know," I said. "What will you do then?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "I'll look at their actions, not their words." He smiled. "That's all anyone can do." That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone on the balcony and let the ocean air fill my lungs. I thought about the woman I'd been before the accident, capable, reliable, exhausted. She'd survived by shrinking her needs until they were invisible. I didn't live like that anymore. My life wasn't perfect. It was busy, messy, demanding. There were days I felt stretched thin, nights I fell asleep with unfinished to-do lists still buzzing in my head. But the difference was this. The life I was tired from now was my own. No one was waiting in the shadows to collect from me. No one was calling my sacrifice love. No one was benefiting from my silence. I had room to breathe, room to choose, room to be present. And as the city lights reflected off the dark water below, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just recovery. It was reclamation. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was finally returning to myself. The real test of everything I'd learned came quietly, without warning or drama. It was a Tuesday evening, warm and still. Liam and Lucas were sprawled on the living room floor, building a city out of blocks while narrating every decision with absolute authority. I was sitting nearby answering emails from work, half listening and half smiling. My phone buzzed. I didn't jump anymore. That alone felt like progress. The notification was an email, not a call, not a voicemail. From my mother. I hesitated, then opened it. The message was longer than the others. Carefully written. Measured. She talked about how hard the past year had been, how everything had fallen apart so fast. She said she missed the boys. She said she didn't understand how love had turned into distance. She wrote about regret. What she didn't write was the word sorry. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and set the phone aside. Liam looked up at me. "Mom, can we make a bridge?" "Yeah," I said, lowering myself to the floor. "Show me what you've got." As we connected blocks and argued about which one was strongest, something settled in my chest. This was the difference. Before, an email like that would have sent me spiraling, replaying conversations, drafting responses, trying to translate vague regret into accountability. Now, it was just information. I wasn't required to fix it. I wasn't required to respond. I wasn't required to soothe feelings that had never been gentle with mine. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, I sat alone on the couch and let myself feel whatever needed to surface. There was sadness. Of course there was. A quiet grief for the parents I'd hoped for but never had, for the version of family that existed only if I kept paying for it. But there was also clarity. I could want healing without chasing it. I could leave space without filling it with guilt. I could love people from a distance when closeness was unsafe. That realization felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. A few days later, Grandpa invited us over for dinner again. Nothing special, just grilled fish, too much dessert, and the boys running barefoot through the backyard until it got dark. As we sat at the table, Grandpa watched me for a long moment. "You look settled," he said. "I feel settled," I replied. "I think that's new." He nodded. Peace usually is. After dinner, while the boys were distracted, he added quietly, "Your father stopped asking me to intervene." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yes," he said. "Not because he understands, because he's finally realizing it won't work." I considered that. That's enough for now. On the drive home, the boys fell asleep in the back seat, their heads tipped toward each other. The streetlights passed in a steady rhythm, familiar and grounding. I thought about how far I'd come from that night in the ambulance, from the version of myself who believed survival meant endurance and love meant sacrifice without limit. I knew better now. Boundaries weren't walls. They were doors with locks I controlled. Some people earned a key, others didn't. And that didn't make me cruel. It made me safe. As I carried the boys inside and tucked them into bed, I realized something else that surprised me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for understanding, not for permission to move on. My life wasn't paused on an unresolved chapter. It was already being written. Quietly, steadily, on my own terms. And that, more than anything else, felt like freedom taking root. The anniversary arrived without ceremony. No reminder popped up on my phone. No tightness in my chest when I woke up. Just sunlight slipping through the curtains and the sound of Liam and Lucas arguing softly about whose turn it was to pour the cereal. 1 year ago, almost to the minute, I had been lying on a gurney, bleeding internally, still calculating how to keep everyone else comfortable while my own life hung in the balance. This morning, I tied shoelaces, wiped milk off the counter, and kissed 2 small foreheads before walking them to school. Life had moved forward. After drop-off, I didn't go straight to the hospital. I drove toward the coast instead, parked near the water, and sat for a while with the engine off. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, steady and indifferent, reminding me how small that night had become. For a long time, I'd believed that moment broke me. Now I understood it clarified me. At work later that day, a junior resident asked how I managed everything. The kids, the hours, the pressure. I almost gave the old answer. the one about grit and sacrifice and pushing through. Instead, I said, I stopped carrying things that were never mine. She frowned slightly, like she didn't understand yet. I smiled. She would. That evening, Grandpa William came over for dinner. The boys greeted him like a holiday, dragging him inside to show off school projects and half-finished Lego creations. He listened with full attention, the way he always did, like nothing else in the world mattered. After they went to bed, we sat quietly at the table with tea. You know, he said after a while, families don't fall apart because of truth. They fall apart because truth finally removes the lies holding them together. I nodded. I used to think telling the truth would destroy everything. And instead, he asked? It showed me what was never real to begin with, I replied, and what was worth keeping. A week later, I received another letter from my mother. This one was different. There were no justifications, no rewriting, no hints about money or hardship. She wrote about regret without qualifiers, about blindness, about how easy it had been to lean on me without ever asking what it cost. She apologized, not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't feel the familiar pressure to resolve anything immediately. For the first time, I trusted myself to decide if and when a response was appropriate. That was new too. One night, as I updated the boys' college accounts, I paused and stared at the growing numbers on the screen. Quiet proof of a future unburdened by debts that were never theirs to carry. The cycle would end with me. Later, I stood in their doorway and watched them sleep, their breathing slow and even. They would never wonder if love had conditions. They would never confuse obligation with affection. They would never be told they were a burden by the people meant to protect them. And if one day they asked me what I'd learned from my own family, I knew exactly what I would say. That love is not something you earn by disappearing. That boundaries are not betrayal. That choosing yourself is not selfish when no one ever chose you first. Some stories end with reconciliation. Some end with distance. Mine ended with something quieter and stronger. Freedom. Freedom to build a life that didn't require my silence. Freedom to give love without buying it. Freedom to stop auditioning for a role I was never meant to play. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, the city humming softly outside, I felt a calm certainty settle deep inside me. I survived the accident, but more importantly, I survived the lie, and I would never live inside it again.